And now it's time for Madison's Mad Facts with your host, Madison Standish.
Hey everybody, it's Madison. Welcome to another Madison on the Air bonus feature of Madison's Mad Facts, where we look at the way things were in real life during these old-timey radio shows. This Mad Facts was originally released as a Patreon exclusive following our 5th Sherlock adventure in May 2025. The topic stems from a very brief moment in our episode. You've probably seen or read in crime and detective stories your whole life, chloroform being used to knock someone out. But the fiction writers have it wrong. So we're going to discuss the history of chloroform, its uses, and debunk the myths. So, what is chloroform? It is a clear, colorless, volatile liquid with a sweet odor. Its chemical name is trichlormethane, and it was first discovered in the early 1800s, although there are some mixed accounts on who gets the official credit. By 1842, Dr. Robert Mortimer Glover discovered the anesthetic qualities of chloroform on lab animals, and by 1847, Dr. James Simpson of Scotland first demonstrated the anesthetic on humans. And there's like this whole thing where Glover blames Simpson for stealing his work, but Glover didn't use it on humans, so whatevs. From that point on, though, chloroform was widely used in human medicine throughout Europe. Now, it should be mentioned that another anesthetic was developed along the same timeline as chloroform in the United States: ether. In fact, after a demonstration in 1848 by a Boston dentist named Dr. William Morton, physician Oliver Wendell Holmes, no relation to Sherlock, first suggested the word anesthesia to describe the process of making a patient unconscious in order to free them from surgical pain. This word was based on the Greek word anathesis, meaning insensibility or loss of sensation. So even though ether was used as an anesthetic as well, there are several reasons chloroform became the preferred anesthetic of the era. Chloroform was known to be faster acting. There were far more positive reports from its use, especially noted during the American Civil War, which utilized both methods in field hospitals for amputations. And the major drawback to ether was it was flammable, while chloroform was not. Even though chloroform rose as the preferred anesthetic, it wasn't without risk. A 15-year-old girl who was having an infected toenail removed died from chloroform when it stopped her heart by creating high levels of adrenaline. And then other cases surfaced of physically fit adults dying from chloroform, with studies showing the chemical could affect the respiratory system and send patients into respiratory arrest where they stop breathing, or led to toxic levels in their liver, killing the liver cells, leading to comas or other long-term damage to the organ. Okay, let's just say we're glad that they don't use it today. So, what about all of the fictional tales of chloroform being used as a knockout drug? Well, in its early discovery, chloroform was used recreationally, much like other drugs we later discover are a bad idea to dabble in for a fun Saturday night. As an inhalant, chloroform was sniffed and gave the user a state of intoxication and euphoria. The drug was easy to acquire and not illegal, so that led to widespread abuse. It was deadly, however, and ran the risk of long-term damage to the body, but that never seems to deter anyone who wants to use drugs. Then chloroform's true crime came to light. It was used by criminals to knock out, daze, or murder their victims. The infamous Chicago serial killer H.H. Holmes, an alias he named himself after Sherlock, as a pharmacist, used an overdose of chloroform to suffocate many of the victims in his murder castle in the 1890s, including many visitors in town for the Chicago World's Fair, which ran from May to October of 1893. Other criminals were known to use chloroform to incapacitate victims for robbery or other dubious acts. This led crime fiction writers to fixate on chloroform as a device in their stories. So, you all have seen, no doubt, countless representations of either a villain using chloroform to take down a victim or a detective who let down his guard, or perhaps a weapon by the hero to incapacitate the criminal. Now is the time for me to burst your bubble and tell you why all of those portrayals were so wrong. Earlier I mentioned that chloroform was preferred over ether as an anesthetic because it was fast-acting. Well, it ain't that fast. The notion of putting a chloroform-soaked cloth over the mouth of a victim and then quickly subduing them is utter nonsense. The average time chloroform requires to take effect is 5 full minutes. It worked in surgery because the person being put under anesthesia was a willing participant. But if you were to sneak up behind someone and put a chloroform cloth over their nose and mouth, you now have 5 minutes of them kicking, flailing, and fighting back before you get them knocked out. You're exhausted from trying to hold the cloth over their face in the right position while you battle their resistance, which probably means you didn't succeed. But what of all those real criminals who did successfully use chloroform against their victims? In those cases, the victim most likely had another drug in their system that they willingly took to mitigate the chances of them fighting back. Generally, someone consuming a lot of alcohol would be a prime target. Or someone talked into taking the chloroform recreationally and then unknowingly given an overdose, which was super easy to do, by the way. Or one of the major contributors to death from chloroform is simply from the person swallowing their tongue and suffocating, which is actually something the skilled anesthesiologist had to constantly monitor during surgery. Interestingly, the smell of chloroform would not set off alarms from a potential victim. It might logically seem that it would generate a sharp stench of alcohol, but it actually is quite sweet-smelling. Our first research into chloroform came during episode 39, Rogue's Gallery. I step in for Richard Rogue, but some of him is still in the role, right? Which is why I recognize the sweet smell of chloroform lingering in the room of the first murder victim. So basically, in our episode of The Second Generation, when Sherlock instructs Dr. Watson to chloroform Harry, which is in the original script, but instead of Harry, the victim is Mr. Lytton Stanley. None of how it went down would happen that way. Dr. Watson even comments, chloroform doesn't take long, does it? Yeah, it do. And I guess Harry was lucky he had a doctor present in case he swallowed his tongue. But hey, the script was written by Hollywood writers. What do they know? Don't blame them entirely. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, in his short story The Last Bow, writes Sherlock using a rag soaked with chloroform to incapacitate a spy. Of course, in the original The Second Generation script, the audience isn't there for Lytton Stanley waking up from the effects of the chemical as Sherlock and Watson have returned back to the bee farm. But in our telling, they carry Harry back and he comes out of the effects in the following scene. For that, our chloroform research tried to give a touch more realism, as headaches, fatigue, dizziness, nausea, and vomiting are all known side effects after being administered the drug. Today, while the medical profession has moved on to safer and more effective drugs for anesthesia, although the last administration of it in Western medicine was actually 1987, chloroform, the chemical, still has a great deal of commercial use in pesticides, rubber production, fire extinguishers, and as a refrigerant, just to name a few. So there are still cases popping up of toxic exposure from chloroform. And there are criminals who still use it. As recently as 2007, a man pleaded guilty for using a stun gun and chloroform to sexually assault minors. Ugh. In any case, I don't imagine the romantic notion of a cloth of chloroform held tightly over someone's face will ever fully disappear from fiction writing. Heck, even the modern TV show take on Sherlock Holmes, Elementary, used chloroform as a device. But now you can watch or read these stories and be way smarter and say, hey, that could never happen. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this Madison's Mad Facts. New Mad Facts for our most recent episodes release as a Patreon exclusive on the 10th of every month. Our Patreon is only $5 a month, and besides the Mad Facts, there's a lot of fun Madison stuff, and you're helping to support our little indie show. Link in the show notes. Okay, everybody,